Hey guys, American Pizza Books here. I am back today with another book review, and today I'm going to be reviewing Revival by Stephen King. So, I've been on a bit of a Stephen King kick as of late. I read Revival not too long ago, and very, very recently I read Doohickey as well by Stephen King, which I will review here pretty soon. But of course I wanted to review this one first before jumping to the review of Doohickey. Now, if you ask people about Revival, in my experience at least, you will probably get like a very mixed response. It seems like some people really like this book, some people don't really care for it, and then there's some people who are just kind of in the middle about it, just kind of indifferent towards it. So I didn't really have any like high expectations or low expectations or anything. I kind of just went into it open-minded and, you know, just expecting whatever. I didn't go into this book expecting a horror novel or like a thriller novel or anything like that. And I think that's the mindset to go into this book with, because if you are looking for a horror novel in this book, you will be pretty disappointed because it's definitely not a horror novel. If I had to describe this book, I would say it's kind of like, it's not really a coming-of-age story. Like, I leaned towards that while I was reading this, but it really isn't, it's not even really a coming-of-age story. It's more like, I would say it's like a drama. I think that's the most, like, accurate description I can give it as far as the genre goes. It's like a drama, but it's also kind of like a fictional memoir, almost, of this guy, Jamie Morton, who is the main character. It's like a memoir of this guy's life and his experiences with the minister, who is Reverend Charles Jacobs, and how this man influences his life as time goes on. I would say that's probably the most accurate description I could give as far as like the overall genre is concerned. So, as far as what the book is about, I'll just read the back to you guys, and I'll just go on from there. So, the new minister came to Harlow, Maine, when Jamie Morton was a boy doing battle with his toy army men on the front lawn. The young Reverend Charles Jacobs and his beautiful wife brought new life to the local church and captivated their congregation. But with Jamie, he shares a secret obsession, a draw so powerful it would have profound consequences 5 decades after the shattering tragedy that turned the preacher against God and long after his final scathing sermon. Now Jamie, a nomadic rock guitarist hooked on heroin, meets Charles Jacobs again, and when their bond becomes a pact beyond even the devil's devising, Jamie discovers that the word revival has many meanings. So, that's the premise. So, in the beginning of the book, we are introduced to Jamie, and in the beginning of the book, he is, I believe, like 5, 6 years old. He's just a little kid. And we see him meeting Charles Jacobs for the first time. And, you know, in the beginning of the book, you know, Charles Jacobs seems like a nice enough guy, like he's the new preacher in town, and, you know, he immediately develops a good relationship with the town, with everyone. You know, a lot of the kids really like him and his sermons, and he has like a unique way of going about, like a unique, different way of teaching, like the Bible and stuff. I also thought that Stephen King did a really good job of reflecting like the times in the beginning of this book, because in the beginning, this book takes place in the 1960s, I believe it was. I believe it was the 1960s or 50s. Let's see. Because I believe it was 1961 was the year in the beginning of the book. 1962, so yes, the 60s. So I think the King did a good job of like reflecting the attitudes and the times of that year. Because there is a point in this book where a tragedy does happen. I don't want to spoil anything. It kind of said on the back, but like a tragedy does happen to the preacher, and he basically gives a sermon, basically calling out like Christianity and God, and like pointing out like a bunch of contradictions and stuff. Like it's basically when he comes to the realization that he no longer believes, and a lot of people who had regularly attended his sermons were very, very upset by that. So it really kind of shows just how big of a grip like religion and religious morality had on society back then, or at least in that part of the U.S. But I thought that that was really well done. But as far as like the characters are concerned, I really like Jamie Morton as our main character because, like I said, we see him grow from like just being a little kid to an older adult, and like up to like we follow him up until he's in his like 50s, 60s and stuff. And I thought that he was developed really well. I really like Jamie a lot. He's a normal guy in the beginning, normal kid, normal guy. He goes through some hard times. He does fall on hard drugs, like I mentioned. He does develop a heroin addiction, but he also has a love for music, and he becomes a musician later on in life. And I thought that King just did a really good job with the main character. He's obviously far from perfect. He's flawed, just like in every Stephen King book. All the characters are flawed. There is no perfectly good or evil character. Like, all the characters are flawed. I mean, I guess there could be some pretty, straightforward evil characters in some of Stephen King's books, but a lot of the time I find that even the bad characters have some nuance to them. So, and obviously Stephen King is one of the best as far as characters go. Like, I think everyone knows that. Anyone who reads, not even just the horror genre, but just in general, if you've read any amount of Stephen King's books, you know how well he does with characters and character development. He's one of the best in the game, and he still is. I've yet to come across an author who writes characters as well as Stephen King does. Like, the ability to make these characters feel like real, actual people that you would meet on the street. Like, there's no one does it like Stephen King. There's also the Reverend Charles Jacobs, who I guess he could be considered the antagonist in this book, but I don't know. I mean, later on in the book, certainly he becomes the antagonist, like, as he kind of loses a lot of his humanity along the way. But in the beginning of the book, and even in the middle of the book, I would say that Charles Jacobs really isn't a bad guy. I think that he has good intentions, but, the famous saying, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, and that pretty much describes, Charles Jacobs in this book. But in the beginning we see him, he's a really likable guy. He does have an interest in electricity and stuff like that, which also plays a role in this book with his character. And then a tragedy obviously strikes him, and I guess, spoiler if you haven't read it, but he loses his wife and daughter in a pretty horrific way. Or, excuse me, wife and son, not daughter, son. He loses his wife and son in a pretty horrific way. And it really shakes his faith, and basically causes him to become... It's not really outright said, but it causes him to become, like, more or less like an atheist, essentially. Like I said, it's not actually said that he becomes like an atheist, but that it's kind of hinted, or at the very least he becomes a massive, massive skeptic, and it causes him to lose all of his faith, all of his belief in God and religion and stuff like that, which leads to the scathing sermon he gives that, like, pisses off the townsfolk, and it causes him to be exiled from the town, and then he has to leave. So you really feel for him in the beginning because of what happens to him and what he has to go through. And just how he's, like, just rejected by the town, just because he gives a differing opinion on religion and stuff like that. So, in the beginning he's pretty sympathetic, and I would say even towards the middle he's sympathetic because him and Jamie's paths do cross again much later in Jamie's life, and Jacob helps Jamie kind of get better because he's going through a heroin addiction, and Jamie's pretty much at the end of his rope at this point. And, Charles does find him and kind of nurses Jamie back to health. And then they kind of travel together for a bit because, Charles is kind of doing this, like, whole circus act. And then they part paths again. But then, like, again later on in life, they cross paths again. And at that point, I think it really shows how far, like, Charles has fallen. And we start to see him become, more of definitely the antagonist of the story. So, I really liked his character, though. I thought that it was very, very, because it's, even at the end of the book, I don't want to say that his character is all bad. Like, it's certainly more bad than good, especially as compared to the beginning of the book. But I don't want to say that his character is just completely evil, because it's not. And I mean, you know, with Jamie makes a lot of shitty decisions too. But he's certainly not the antagonist. But again, you know, he's not perfect either. But so, I thought the characters were really well done. There are other characters in this book. There's obviously Jamie's family. We have his parents. He has like 5 siblings, I think. And even though we don't get to spend like a lot of time with all of them, each one of them I felt was really, really well defined and realized and developed. Like, even though we don't get inside their heads or spend much time with any of them, really. Like, we get to spend some time with some of them, but not like a lot of time. But even those characters I thought were really well defined. I thought the parents were really well defined. Even the side characters that show up for, you know, just a little bit and then leave, I thought they were really well written. So, you know, the character work was really well done, which is, again, no surprise with Stephen King. The pacing, I thought, was actually pretty good. Stephen King sometimes struggles with pacing, you know, in a lot of his books, particularly his longer books, disregard the Siren. But in some of his longer books, he does tend to have like a sagging middle. You know, some people have coined it. Like, the book will start off really a lot's happening, and then the book will like slow down, and usually King will have like his characters all like grouped up and talking and stuff, which is, you know, I've read enough Stephen King to where I can kind of notice kind of a formula in some of his books that are, especially his longer books. So, but this certainly isn't one of his longer books. I think this is only like, it's about 450 pages, give or take, so it's not a long book. And plus, I feel like the book, it didn't outstay its welcome. Like, everything that happened, I didn't feel like didn't belong, or there was no point where I was reading this where I was like, why is this in the story? Why is this, like, what place does this have? Like, I felt like everything that happened meant something to the story, and I just didn't feel like it outstayed its welcome in any way. So I thought the pacing was actually really good. And, like, it's not an action-packed, like, book. Like, stuff does happen, but this book is very much a character piece, I would say, or like a piece on, you know, a character piece for several characters, but it's very much a character piece. And again, you're following this guy throughout his life and what happens in his life. So I would expect something like that. Again, if you're expecting like a horror novel or a thriller novel with a lot of action in it, or a lot of like scary stuff in it, you're going to be disappointed with this one. But if you go into it knowing that it's not going to be like that, and it's going to be more of a character study, more of a literary, I guess, based work, because I've read some reviews, and they say that this is one of Stephen King's more literary works, like in his later years, because this was released in 2014, so this isn't even 10 years old yet. So this is fairly newer King work, and I would definitely have to agree. And I don't like using the term literary because I just think it sounds pretentious, but I would definitely say that this is one of King's more serious, mature literary works. And, you know, for once I can actually say that in a good way, because, you know, the book itself, it's not pretentious, it's not anything like that. If you think of like literature or classic, whatever, it's nothing like that. So it's just it's a good book with good characters, and, you know, when it comes to Stephen King, that's all you can ask for. So the pacing was good, the character work was good, you know, the writing, obviously, again, it's King, the writing is phenomenal, you know, top tier in my opinion. So what more needs to be said? And I think that there are some strong themes in this book. I think one of the themes could definitely be grief and what it can do to someone, and also obsession and what it does to Jacob. Because, you know, it starts out in the book that he has this interest in electricity, and it's more of a hobby in the beginning, like a hobby that he has a lot of interest in, like on the side. But as the book goes on and we come across him again and again and again, we see it developing into this like obsession where he's going further and further and further with it. And we know that it's driven in part by the grief that he suffers from losing his wife and son. So, you know, grief, obsession, and yeah, I would say those are two major themes in this book. And then I guess you could also say just like the passage of time would also be a theme in this book, because again, it really is kind of a theme in this book, is just time. Because this book takes place over the span of like 50 some years. So, you know, that's something, and just how time can pass you by, you know, and being able to view things in retrospect and remember things that you went through, like as a kid or as a younger person, and then being able to look back on those things with more perspective and stuff, because we see that with Jamie and how he grows in this book. But yeah, overall though, I really like this book. I didn't think, like I said, I didn't think it dragged on too long. I thought the characters were really well done. I thought that I can't really find any complaints with this book at all, really. Yeah, I would say, like I said, if you're looking for a horror novel, look elsewhere in King's, you know, catalog of work. I would say if you're looking for a horror novel, go with like Pet Sematary or Salem's Lot or Misery or something like that. I'm trying to think of like a newer work that he's released that it would be more horror based, but I can't think of one off the top of my head at the moment. Or even like The Outsider would be more close to horror than this would be. But if you go into this just with the mindset of you're going to read a story with good writing, with good characters, and, you know, with some good themes in it, then I think you'll really enjoy this book, because that's what I went into this book thinking. I didn't go into it thinking I was going to read a horror novel or anything like that, just what I said. So, yeah, so I would give this, like, I'd give it 5 out of 5, honestly. I thought it was really, really good. Definitely one of King's... See, there's a debate between fans about King's older work versus his newer work. For me personally, I enjoy both. I think both are really good. I think that King's older work is really, really good, and I think it really stands up even now. And I think that King's newer work is good. I think they both have places, you know. I think they both have their own, you know, place in, you know, whatever you want to call it, whether it's horror literature or literature in general. I think they both stand up. I don't think that really one is better than the other. It's different for sure, but I don't think that, you know, one needs to be better than the other. They're just different, you know. So, anyway, so that's it for this one. Let me know what you guys think of Revival. Have you read it? Let me know what you think of it if you have. What's your favorite Stephen King book? There you go. So, that's it for this one. Peace, and have a good day.